Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Individuals wishing to address the Board of Trustees are requested to complete a speaker card and deliver the card to the city clerk's staff prior to the item being heard by the Board of Trustees. Please observe a 3-minute limit for communications, and once called upon to speak, we request that you state your name and city of residence for the record. Do you have any speaker cards?
No, we do not.
Okay, communications from the public. This portion of the agenda is intended for general public comment only on items within the Board of Trustees jurisdiction that are not listed elsewhere on the agenda. Please note that the state law prohibits the Board of Trustees from discussing or taking action on these items. Please observe a 3-minute limit for communications, and once called upon to speak, we request that you state your name and city of residence for the record. Ms. Duarte, are there any speaker cards from the public?
No, there isn't.
Okay, meeting minutes. So approval of the minutes for the Pension Stabilization Trust Board of Trustees meeting on January 11th, 2023. Ms. Duarte, are there any speaker cards from the public for the meeting minutes?
No, there isn't.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The item passes 5-0.
Okay. Agenda items, so we're gonna move to the presentation and the trustee board meeting update, Pension Stabilization Trust and CalPERS Actuarial Report. Kim Sitton, our wonderful finance director. That wasn't written in there, but you are wonderful. Please present the item. Ms. Duarte, are there any, we'll go to the presentation, then we'll ask for any speaker cards. So go ahead.
So thank you very much, Chad. Good morning. Good morning to the trustee board and members of the associations who have joined us today. So today we're going to go through just a little bit of information on what the trustee board is, talk about the Pension Stabilization Trust investment reports and the new actuarial reports received from CalPERS, and that's our primary purpose for today's meeting. So the trustee board, what the history on that is, in 2021, the City Council approved the issuance of pension obligation bonds. And then with that, the City Council approved a pension management policy. And part of that policy was to establish a pension stabilization trust. Initially, the city contributed $30 million from the general fund. And then in this last fiscal year, we contributed an additional $2.1 million. There are 5 members that serve as an advisory group to the City Council, made up of the city treasurer, city manager, assistant city manager, finance director, and accounting manager. This board meets twice per year, once in October after we get the CalPERS reports and have had a chance to review and analyze the information, and then we can provide a presentation on that information. And then again in January, after the end of the year audit is complete and we have the financial statements ready. And then at that time, we can discuss any pension stabilization contribution recommendations that we want to go back and make to the City Council based on how the general fund ended for the prior fiscal year and any surplus amount that was left over. Any questions on that portion? So talking a little bit about the Pension Stabilization Trust, like I mentioned, we initially contributed $30 million and then an extra $2.1 million. With interest, as of July 31st, the value is $32,766,094. There are monthly trust investment reports and a pension stabilization investment policy. Those items can both be found on the city's website under the finance department. And in addition, the pension stabilization investment report can be found on the council agenda when we take that information to council for review. It's generally the second meeting of the month, but that sometimes varies depending on timing. So then moving on to the primary purpose why we're here today. So the reports that we're going to talk about today are from June 30th, 2022, and those were received in August of 23. There's always a 1-year lag in when we receive that information. And these reports help determine the contributions that the city is going to have to make and employees will have to make starting for fiscal year 25, which of course starts on July 1st, 2024. The city has 4 different PERS groups, and you may notice for fire, there's 2 different groups that are split out. I'll explain why that's set up that way. Police and miscellaneous groups. Miscellaneous is, of course, all the non-sworn public safety positions. Those groups are made up entirely 100% of people who either currently work for Corona, have worked for Corona in the past at some point, so they're either retired or they've spent some years working in Corona and maybe they're working in their careers in other agencies and have not yet retired. Fire works a little bit differently in that in 2003, the CalPERS board came down and said for any agencies that had less than 100 people within their plan, they have to come into this risk pool and get merged together with all agencies throughout the state. And that was supposed to help alleviate big fluctuations in either demographic changes or investment results and provide a little bit better risk management basically for those different plans. So in 2004, that became effective, and we, of course, at that point had the Fire Classic plan. And then when PEPRA members came into play, then the state set up a separate Fire PEPRA risk pool as well. So that's why the fire ones are set up just a little bit differently. And in police and miscellaneous, there's a blend of both Classic and PEPRA members within those police and miscellaneous groups. So now let's talk a little bit about the factors that impact our unfunded accrued liability, or the UAL. The investment returns, the discount rate is the term that CalPERS uses, and that really is their estimated rate of return, what they think they'll get on their investments. And their current policy has it set at 6.8%. For fiscal year 2022, they actually had a loss of 6.1% in their investments. So you take the loss of 6.1% versus the positive 6.8, and really it's a gap of 12.9% of what happened in that fiscal year. In fiscal year 2023, their preliminary results are that they had a positive return of 5.8%, which is good, obviously much better than in 22, but still 1% less than what their estimate was. And that information won't be reflected until the reports that we receive next year about this time. So some of the other factors that impact the unfunded liability and our contribution rates are member demographics, any salary increases, and any actuarial assumption changes. For instance, mortality rates. When COVID came into play, they had to review how that affected some of their mortality rates and assumptions they were making and how long people will live. So like I said, there was a negative 6.1% return in this last fiscal year for 22. But what we have to do with CalPERS is take kind of a longer look, because that's what they're doing as well, is taking a longer look when setting those policies on their rate of return. So if we look back at 1 year, like I said, the preliminary number is 5.8%. But if we look at an average of the last 5 years, we're at 6.1%, 10 years, 7.1, and so on. There was a employer leadership dialogue I attended in September of 2023. And some of the information they shared is that they said when they look at their 10-year projection, or 20-year projection, sorry, they're averaging a return of about 6.2 to 7.9% with a median right around 7%. So based on that information, they're not expecting to make any changes or any recommended changes to the CalPERS board when they meet in November. So they believe that 6.8% will continue to be their target amount, and that will remain in place for at least for another 2 years.
Oh, can I add to that, Kim?
Yeah.
I would just say it's just a really short sample size, less than 2 years. We're not going to track exactly what CalPERS is in, what their returns are, because we're not invested in the exact same stuff as they are. Mm-hmm. But I'd say if we have at least a 7-year time frame when we look back, it's not very difficult to get 7% a year. Mm-hmm. The two factors that we take into account on a portfolio for that growth return is going to be appreciation and then interest earned. And so over the last 20 years, 30 years, interest rates have gone down until about 2020, 2021, right? So that was a really anemic side of returns in investing, because interest earned was really, really low. So we had to rely on appreciation. Now interest rates are back up above average. It's not very hard to get a 7% return when interest rates are 3, 4, 5%. So I think give us 3 to 5 years longer, it's going to be very likely that we get above a 6.8% average return, regardless of whatever CalPERS is doing. They invest in a lot of things that we don't own, but that's just their kind of sample for us to look at.
Yeah, And one of the things to keep in mind too is that CalPERS really only has two sources of income. It's either contributions coming from members or agencies or employees, and investment returns. So when the investment returns don't meet their expectations, something's got to give. So then it starts to affect the rates that the agencies are charged. So here's what the unfunded liability looks like for June 30th, 2022. It's a big number, almost $82 million, a lot more than we had originally anticipated. But again, it's a snapshot of a point in time, okay? So you can see over on the left is the funded ratios for the different groups, funded anywhere between 87.7% up to 92.7%. If you recall, a year ago at this time, we were looking at being fully funded for all the different plans because of the fact that we had done those pension obligation bonds. So this is what it looks like based on the information that they've given us in this report of what the contributions will be for both the normal cost and our unfunded liability, which is the UAL. So if you look by fiscal year, that first column on the left is the normal cost. That's something that will never go away. As long as we have employees that are in the PERS system, that will always be a factor. The unfunded liability is that like what we're talking about when the CalPERS does this assessment and whether their investment returns are up or down, and then they give us this new amount that we are required to contribute. So what they do is they phase it in over, they really kind of ramp it up over a 5-year period. So it takes us 20 years to pay that off, and you'll see it grows in the required UAL column. It goes 3.5, 5.1, 6.7, 8.2, and then it flattens out at 9.8 for the rest of that 20-year term. And so you can see over to the right-hand side is the total projected employer contribution for all the different plans by fiscal year. So with the pension management policy that the city had approved, what we were trying to do is be very proactive in our approach of those unfunded liabilities because we knew they were coming. We knew there'd be new assessments from the different CalPERS actuarial reports. So you can see the table there. We had projected we'd potentially trying to manage up to, say, $15 million in unfunded liabilities, but obviously this number is higher than what we had originally anticipated. So what we'll be doing is this group provides recommendations to the City Council as part of our mid-year budget process, like I said, based on the end of the year surplus that we have in the general fund. And one of the things that we'll talk about at our January meeting is this information here as well, and just keep moving forward in trying to address those unfunded liabilities. So the next steps for this group are to meet in January and to discuss, like I said, the unfunded liability and any surplus that we have and any recommendations that we'll make to the City Council. The date of that meeting has not been set yet. And that's all I have for my presentation, unless anyone has any questions.
Not for me. Julie?
Yes, sir.
Nothing? Okay.
We don't have a contribution in fiscal year '24.
So in '24, let me see here. No, on the required UAL, we did not because of the fact that the pension obligation bonds have taken care of that. So, yeah. Of course, we have a debt service payment on the pension obligation bonds, but not a UAL payment.
I have a question, reference to CPC members. If they're under 5 years and they're not vested, is the city on the hook for them?
So let's see, when they, you mean if they separate before the 5 years and they don't
They
get
separate,
vested?
or even if they're just still new here, or let's say they work 3 years and they leave and they go to, I don't know, Riverside.
Uh-huh.
Are we still paying part of that contribution? Or does Riverside take that? Like whatever agency takes them, does they take that responsibility?
So what happens is this, okay, if they move on to the other agency is paying their full costs at that point, okay? But when they go to retire, then yes, we have a portion that we have to contribute, because we've seen this happen is it's something called the replacement benefit fund. We've seen where we had somebody hired here maybe as a very entry-level position, and they've gone on in their career and moved up in other agencies, and maybe they're a director now at another agency and they go to retire. Obviously, what we contributed was based on their entry-level position way back when, and now they're getting retirement at director level. So there's what's called the replacement benefit fund, and we actually get an invoice once that person goes to retire of the amount that then we have to chip in towards their retirement. Now, of course, it would only be, like you said, that 3-year piece that the city's on the hook for, not their whole career. But yeah, we still do have to pay a part if they stay in the PERS system and retire from it.
But if they never become vested, if they're here under 5 years and leave to an agency or a private sector,
Then we're not, yeah, because then at that point, if they don't get vested, they're actually forced to cash out, but they only get back the premiums that came from their paycheck at that point, not what the city paid for them. Any other questions?
So if there's no further questions, Chair Willardson?
Yep.
Ready for adjournment.
Okay, no questions, no other speaker cards, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.